TechDaily.ai, your source for technical information. This deep dive is sponsored by Stonefly, your trusted solution provider and advisor in enterprise storage, backup, disaster recovery, hyperconverged in VMware, Hyper-V, Proxmox cluster, AI servers, and public and private cloud. Check out stonefly.com or email your project requirements to sales@stonefly.com. Okay, so today, we're going to dive deep into something pretty fundamental, really. How we think, how we learn.
Yeah, it's core stuff. We've been looking at some frameworks, different ways to kind of structure how you approach learning and problem solving, things that can genuinely make you more effective.
Exactly. And the sources we looked at, they come at it from slightly different angles, but there's this common thread, isn't there? Everyone wants to get knowledge faster, make it stick, make it useful.
Absolutely. It's about getting that knowledge quickly and thoroughly. These frameworks really tackle that desire.
So the mission today basically is to unpack some, well, practical strategies, ways you can enhance your thinking skills. We want to help you move beyond just knowing stuff.
To actually understanding it, applying it, that aha moment where it clicks.
Precisely.
Okay.
Okay, let's get into it. First up, this idea that thinking, well, it's not all the same, is it? It happens on different levels.
That's a key starting point. Think of it like levels of complexity. You can't really jump to, say, analyzing something deeply if you don't grasp the basics first.
Right. And there's a classic framework for this, isn't there? Bloom's taxonomy.
Yeah, exactly. It's foundational in education. The original version laid out 6 levels, started with just, basic knowledge, recalling facts.
Okay.
Then comprehension, understanding those facts, then application, using them, then analysis, breaking things down, synthesis, putting parts together in a new way, and finally, evaluation, making judgments about value.
But it got an update, right? Made it a bit more active.
It did. The revised version uses verbs, which makes it clearer what you're actually supposed to do. So knowledge became remember. Comprehension is understand. Application is still apply. Analysis is analyze. Evaluation is evaluate. And synthesis, that putting together part, became create, which really highlights that top-level skill.
Create. Yeah, that feels like the peak, doesn't it? Generating something new based on everything below it.
It is. And this revision, it just makes the learning expectations much, much clearer for you as a learner. It's not just about memorizing.
Right. It's about showing you get it, you can use it, dissect it, judge it, and maybe build on it.
Precisely. And, while we're focusing mostly on the thinking part, the cognitive domain Bloom's framework actually covers skills, the psychomotor stuff, and even attitudes, the affective domain. But yeah, cognitive is our focus today.
Okay, so understanding these levels is step one. But how do we actually develop those higher levels, the stuff often called HOTS, higher order thinking skills?
Right. HOTS, moving beyond just remembering and understanding into applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating.
Because that's what employers really want, isn't it? Critical thinking.
Oh, absolutely. It constantly comes up as a top desired skill. Frameworks like Bloom's help promote these HOTS because they give you, the learner, a structure. They categorize the objectives.
So you can see where you are and where you need to go.
Exactly. It encourages you to reflect, like, am I just remembering this or can I actually analyze it? It pushes for that continuous self-assessment.
Okay, so it's a practical tool, not just theory. Now, this leads into something really interesting you mentioned, metacognition. It sounds a bit technical, maybe?
It can sound that way, but the concept is actually pretty straightforward and, honestly, incredibly powerful for learning.
Okay, break it down for us. Metacognition.
At its heart, it's thinking about your own thinking. It's being aware of your thought processes and being able to control them, especially for the purpose of learning.
Ah, like being your own mental coach.
That's a great way to put it. Strong metacognitive skills have a massive impact on how well you learn and perform. It's awareness and control.
So 2 parts then, knowing about your thinking and managing it.
Spot on. The first part is metacognitive knowledge. This includes knowing yourself as a learner, like, do you learn better visually? Or by doing. That's declarative knowledge.
Okay.
It also includes knowing how to use different learning strategies, like summarizing or self-testing. That's procedural knowledge. And finally, knowing when and why to use specific strategies, conditional knowledge.
Right. Knowing the right tool for the job and when to use it. And the second part, the management.
That's metacognitive regulation. This is the active part. It involves planning, deciding how you'll approach a learning task, what strategies you'll use, then monitoring, checking your understanding as you go along, like asking yourself, does this make sense? Am I getting this?
Okay, that's crucial.
And finally, evaluating after the task, looking back and thinking, okay, how did my plan work? Were those strategies effective? What should I do differently next time?
It sounds very
Yeah.
involved, very active. But you mentioned earlier that lots of us tend to be more passive learners.
Yeah, that's a huge point. It's very common to just, reread notes or highlight text, maybe listen passively. These aren't very engaging metacognitively.
And cramming, the classic student move.
Oh, definitely. Cramming might get you through a test sometimes, but the information just doesn't stick long term. You can't really use it later because you haven't processed it deeply.
So what are the better strategies? The ones that fire up our metacognition?
Well, things like self-testing are incredibly powerful. Actively trying to retrieve information from memory, quizzing yourself,
Even if you get it wrong.
especially if you get it wrong. The effort of retrieval itself strengthens the memory, much more than just passively rereading. Spacing out your study helps too. Don't cram it all in one go.
Right, distributed over time.
Exactly. And interleaving, mixing up different topics or types of problems instead of blocking them all together, that helps you learn to differentiate between concepts.
Okay, self-testing, spacing, interleaving. But choosing the right strategy. It depends, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's not one size fits all. You have to consider, what's the material like? How are you going to be tested? What are you trying to achieve with this learning? Is it deep understanding or just recall?
Deep versus surface learning.
Yeah. Deep strategies focus on connecting ideas, understanding meaning. Surface strategies are more about recalling facts. And honestly, you often need both. You need the facts before you can connect them deeply.
Makes sense. But why don't people always use these better, more active strategies? What stops them?
Several things can get in the way. Sometimes people just don't believe the effortful strategies will work better than their familiar, easier habits.
Inertia, kind of.
Sort of. Or they might lack the know-how. They don't really understand how to self-test effectively or when spacing is most useful, that procedural or conditional knowledge we mentioned.
Okay.
And frankly, strategies like self-testing can feel uncomfortable. It forces you to see what you don't know, and that doesn't always feel good.
Yeah, that, I don't get this feeling. It's easier to just reread and feel like you're making progress, even if you aren't really.
Precisely. There's also the aspect of using metacognition during high-pressure situations, like exams.
Right. What about that? Like, should you change your answer if you're unsure?
Well, the research suggests you should monitor your thinking. If you have a clear reason based on recalling specific information, not just a vague feeling of familiarity, changing an answer is often beneficial. It shows you're actively evaluating your own certainty.
Interesting. And the learning doesn't stop when the exam paper is handed in, right?
Yeah.
There's the evaluation afterwards.
Absolutely critical of looking back. How did I do? Was my study plan effective? Did those strategies pay off? That reflection helps you refine your approach for next time. College, for instance, usually offers more chances for that kind of evaluation than high school.
Okay, so metacognition is really about being the driver of your own learning bus, constantly checking the map and adjusting the route.
Great analogy. Now let's shift slightly to another big one. Critical thinking. We hear that term everywhere. What does it really mean in practice?
Yeah, beyond the buzzword.
Well, fundamentally, it's about taking conscious charge of your thinking. It's about applying intellectual standards to the structures inherent in thought to improve its quality, being deliberate and skillful about it.
Okay. Taking charge.
Hmm.
Is there a framework for that too?
There is. A very helpful one is the Paul Elder framework. It breaks critical thinking down into three main components that work together.
3 components, what are they?
First, the elements of thought, the basic building blocks of reasoning. Second, the universal intellectual standards, the criteria you use to judge the quality of reasoning. And third, the intellectual traits, the characteristics of a fair-minded, skilled thinker.
Okay, let's unpack those. Elements of thought first.
Right. There are 8 elements present in all thinking. Every time we reason, there's a purpose. There's a question at issue or a problem. We make assumptions. We think from a point of view.
Right.
We use data, information, evidence. We use concepts and ideas. We make inferences or interpretations leading to conclusions. And all reasoning has implications and consequences.
Wow, okay. That's quite a list. So ideally, we should be aware of all those things when we're thinking seriously about something.
That's the goal. Being aware allows you to examine them. Now, how do you examine them? Using the intellectual standards.
Right, the quality checks, what are they?
These are the standards you apply to the elements. Things like clarity, is it understandable? Accuracy, is it true? Precision, is it specific enough? Relevance, does it relate directly to the question?
Okay.
Depth, does it address the complexities? Breadth, does it consider other perspectives? Logic, does it make sense? Significance, does it focus on what's important? And fairness, is it unbiased?
And you can ask yourself questions for each of those, right? Like, is this really relevant, or am I considering other points of view?
Exactly. They act as prompts to assess your reasoning, and consistently applying these standards to the elements helps you develop the third component.
The intellectual traits.
Yes. These are the habits of mind of a good critical thinker. Things like intellectual humility, knowing you don't know everything, intellectual courage, willingness to challenge beliefs, intellectual empathy, understanding other viewpoints,
Fine.
intellectual autonomy, thinking for yourself, intellectual integrity, holding yourself to high standards, intellectual perseverance, sticking with hard problems, confidence in reason, trusting logical processes, and fair-mindedness, trying to be impartial.
So someone who has these traits, what do they actually do?
Well, a well-cultivated critical thinker raises clear questions, gathers relevant information effectively, assesses it carefully, reaches well-reasoned conclusions, thinks open-mindedly about alternatives, and communicates solutions clearly.
And you can see how the metacognition piece fits in here, right? Monitoring your thinking, evaluating it against these standards.
Absolutely. Metacognitive strategies directly fuel critical thinking. They enable that reflection and regulation needed to apply the standards effectively. It's all very interconnected, especially vital in things like online learning where you have to be self-directed.
Makes total sense. Okay, one more angle to explore. Analytical thinking. How does that fit in, particularly with problem solving?
Analytical thinking is a very systematic approach. It's about breaking down complex information or problems into smaller parts to understand them better and make logical decisions.
So more methodical than just critical thinking generally.
I'd say it's the type of critical thinking, perhaps, but with a strong emphasis on structure and dissection. The typical process is gather info, break it down, identify patterns or relationships, develop potential solutions based on that analysis, test them, and figure out the best one.
What kind of skills are involved there?
Things like determining cause and effect, really examining relationships between parts, predicting logical sequences, recognizing underlying patterns, and using conditional logic that if this, then that thinking.
How is it different from, say, creative thinking?
Creative thinking is often less organized, right? It's about generating lots of ideas, looking from many angles, maybe making unexpected connections. Analytical thinking is more linear, more focused on deconstruction and logical flow. And while critical thinking evaluates the quality and potential biases in reasoning, analytical thinking is more focused on the structure and relationship within the information itself.
Gotcha. And some jobs really lean heavily on this, right?
Whoa, for sure. Think about business analysts, cybersecurity folks, data scientists, financial analysts. They all need to systematically break down information, find patterns, and draw logical conclusions. A data scientist, for example, isn't just looking at numbers. They're analyzing them to find trends, build models, and provide insights.
So if you want to get better at this,
Yeah.
what can you actually do?
Well, practice helps. When you face a problem, consciously try to gather all the relevant facts first, break the problem down, don't jump to the first solution, brainstorm a few. Then, systematically analyze the pros and cons of each potential solution. And really important, evaluate the outcome afterwards. What worked, what didn't, why.
Learn from it.
Exactly. Doing things like logic puzzles, strategy games, those help build the muscle. Reading books on analysis or data, even taking a class in statistics or logic can provide structure. Networking with analytical thinkers can expose you to their processes too.
You know, that point about data analysis, it's not just about reporting the numbers, is it? It's finding the story inside the numbers.
Precisely. That's where analytical thinking shines. You need to understand the relationships, the context, the why behind the data. What questions are you actually trying to answer? It's about moving from data points to valuable insights.
Okay, so we've covered quite a bit. We've looked at Bloom's taxonomy for understanding the levels of thinking,
Metacognition for taking control of your own learning process,
the Paul Elder framework for really honing that critical thinking edge,
and the nuts and bolts of analytical thinking for tackling problems systematically.
and underlying all of this is that desire we talked about at the start. The desire you likely have for knowledge that's not just collected, but truly understood and usable.
Yeah, these frameworks aren't just academic concepts. They offer really practical tools and approaches for you to become a more effective learner and thinker.
So here's something to think about, maybe a final thought for you listening. The next time you're learning something new or trying to solve a tricky problem, pause for a second. Actively consider how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, reflect on your process. Ask yourself, Could being more aware of my metacognition help here? Should I be applying those intellectual standards more deliberately? Or maybe a more structured analytical breakdown is what's needed.
Which approach could give you the biggest boost right now? It's about that conscious choice and continuous refinement.
Exactly. It's a journey, becoming a better thinker, and hopefully these ideas give you some useful signposts along the way.
TechDaily.ai, your source for technical information. This deep dive was sponsored by Stonefly, your trusted solution provider and advisor in enterprise storage, backup, disaster recovery, hyperconverged in VMware, Hyper-V, Proxmox cluster, AI servers, and public and private cloud. Check out stonefly.com or email your project requirements to sales@stonefly.com.